name's Patrick. I know some of you have been hanging out with me for a while this morning. I appreciate that. This workshop is called public speaking. A lot of times people go and they say it's like facing your number one fear. There's the statistic in the joke that for most people the number one fear in the world is public speaking. Number two is death, so people would rather be in the coffin at a funeral than giving the eulogy. That's the big joke. For me, I have a fear of heights. I have a fear of heights. That's one of the reasons why I actually took that rock climbing course in college, was to battle that fear. Other things I've done to take on that fear, I've done bungee jumping, I've done skydiving, to take on the fear of heights. I still have a fear of heights. It's not as pronounced as it used to be, but it is still something that's very much alive for me. In the rock climbing course, there's a lot that I learned, and I think a lot of it works as a metaphor in terms of what we can go and how we can speak. This is my philosophy and my approach to public speaking. It is not the only philosophy or the only approach. It may differ than some of the stuff you learn within school. It may differ from some of the stuff that you were taught within speech and debate. This will not make you win a speech and debate award. My method of speeching would fail in speech and debate. It violates the rule of speech and debate, but I think it's an effective method for doing what I do and doing what many of us do. So the first things first is to understand the mountain that we're climbing. Some of you have already seen this little part. I apologize for the repetition, but I think it's important because it affects the way that I look at speaking. We have to do some communication theory. Communication theory initially said that there were senders and that there were receivers. And a sender would send out a message and a receiver would receive it. The problem is that our world does not understand 100% of the things that come out of our mouth. And people are also sending back messages. So we're going to say that we're both senders and receivers. Communication takes place between two or more people. So right now there's me and about 600 of you. We've got communication taking place between the 600 of us. Some of you are talking to your neighbor. That's a bit of communication. Some of you are nodding your heads towards me. Even though you're not speaking, you're communicating towards me. Some of you are falling asleep. That also communicates a message towards me. So we've got all that taking place. All that takes place within a context. That context affects us. At this environment, within this workshop environment, your expectations of a workshop are very much different than your expectations last night when it was Spirit Night. You are automatically quieter walking into this event than you were entering in the general session last night because of context of what takes place. We communicate differently within the different types of classrooms that we're in. We communicate differently within the different types of relationships. My approach towards speaking is affected by that context. At a Key Club event, I speak differently than I do at a school assembly. School assembly, I'm going to do things a little bit differently. I'm going to tell a lot of the same stories. Some of the stories I'm just going to flat out change. My attire will change. I will not wear a suit to a school assembly unless the school is in uniforms and they ask me to wear a suit. Otherwise, I'm jeans, a t-shirt, maybe a button-down shirt. We have the ability over time to affect our context. So I walk in the convention. If you noticed with last night's speech, I know that early on, you are super, super, super pumped up and you're like crazy energetic. One of my responsibilities as a speaker, in order to get to the end of my speech, is to have moments for you to be super energetic, but also to halt some of the extra cheering that's taking place with some of those earlier moments so that I know that later on I won't be derailed within the stories. And I can affect that context. So we can still have great cheering, but it's not going to be every 2 seconds. And so we have the ability to affect our context. It just takes some time. Our whole ballgame is to co-create shared meaning. I want you to be on the same page as me. So I have to make sure that my reference points within stories, the way that I go into it, makes sense so that you understand them as well. This is the whole ballgame. That's my mountain. As I'm going into this, I've got some things to focus in on a speech. When you're rock climbing, you actually have handholds and footholds. And these are what you're looking at, like what's my next thing. So there's 4 big areas that I'm focusing on when I'm giving a speech. The first is my audience. Who are you? What is your age demographic? What was going on within your world when you were a child? Because I do some humor about being a little kid sometimes. I didn't do as much. Sometimes I do like a whole 5-minute section on what it was like when you were 5. I didn't do that within this speech. But if I'm at your school, I am. And so I'm researching what it was like. Because the things that were on television when you were 5 is different than the stuff that was on television when I was 5. What is your purpose? This session last night, this was district convention, you are Key Clubbers at a district event. I already know that you're active in Key Club. You're not just some random person coming to the first meeting. And so it affects how I'm going to go and how I'm going to approach it. I'm also going to look at the context. It's a district convention. It's opening night. Opening night context is different because sometimes I'm asked to do a closing speech at an event. And instead of going and saying, hey, focus on the workshops, I'm saying, go out and do. And so that shifts my message. I'm going to look at what my message actually is. Last night, I wanted to do some stuff within the theme of believing in the magic of service. And so I want us to go and look at the effect of that. I also wanted to focus in part on belief. I do want to apologize just in general. I was really nervous last night, and so some of my speech got a little bit stumbled upon, simply because my fiance was in the audience, and this was the first time she'd ever seen me speak. Aww. So she just knows me as the guy that like goes to movies with her, and like we cook, and I'm finally was like, this is my job. This is why I travel so much. And so I was like, I hope she likes what I'm doing. And so sometimes I was in my head too much. But I wanted to think about, if I could continue to go back when I got lost, what's my message? What's the point of which I'm trying to share? Making that happen. And then finally, who are you? You cannot give my speech. Because that's me, that's my persona. What do you bring? What are your assets, your gifts? And how do you make that happen from the platform? I'm also going to go and I'm going to think about making sure that those holds are solid. Because while you may see a hold on a mountain, it doesn't always mean that it's going to be one that's going to be stable. And so certain elements make it happen. The first is the idea of it being immediate or being mediated. To the best of my ability, I want to bring objects or stories into that environment. It's why I bring in my physical rock climbing shoe. I can tell you, my shoe is smaller. But by holding up the actual shoe, you guys could see it during video. Some of you who are close enough to the stage could physically see it. It's why I go and I bring in the pictures and why I have those things up on the screen. Because you can go and you can actually see that picture of my siblings. I can talk about my siblings without showing a picture. But by bringing that photo up there, it makes it a little bit more real. It brings it into the environment. Next deal is it happened to you. Making a real story. When I was Key Club governor, I told a bunch of chicken soup for the stole stories, which are these generic things. That whole sea star story made a difference to that one. Actually, that story's about killing sea stars, because you would physically kill the sea star by hucking out in the ocean. It's a horrible, horrible story. It's really, really generic. It's an awful story to tell. We all have real stories within our own life. I had one person on Twitter last night say, hey, that speaker copied everything else of this other speaker. And I immediately replied back, and I'm like, no. Because unless the person lived the exact same life as me with a photograph of my siblings, and unless that speaker had the exact same setup with the siblings, unless that speaker that they saw went to Coldstone on September 11th, like those are real life stories that have happened to me. Now, the interesting part is my humor references, yeah, another speaker could totally do a quick Harry Potter reference. Another student could quickly make the reference to Harry Houdini or David Blaine and how those guys work hard for magic. But the personal stories, no other speaker has that. You have your own stories within your own life that illustrate points and illustrate aspects. The idea is coming up with what is your things and how do each one of those works. It happened yesterday. The more immediate, the more recent something is, the better off it is. My story about sharing about Michaela with last week with Easter has an immediacy to it and a better power than my 9/11 story. The sad or strange things for me right now with September 11th is most of you were so young when it took place that most of your memory from 9/11 is based about what you've learned since then. Many of your parents probably prevented you from actually watching it on television. You may have seen a quick image or seen it in the paper, but your interaction with it is very different than when I told that same story 6 years ago, and people were more in like middle school when 9/11 took place. Final few things to consider. One is the metaphor. This workshop is a metaphor. If you notice, each one of my stories illustrate a metaphorical concept. The idea of the play day at Erickson and taking 2 steps back. The shoe and that being tough. Metaphors are really, really great. This speech is not effective, or rather this workshop is not effective because I'm using lists. You can see that list up on stage, and so it's not as dynamic as a story that I was going to do. I'm using this to cover a lot of points very quickly, but if we had more time together, I could storytell and illustrate a lot more of this, and it'd be a lot more exciting for you to see. And rhetorical questions, the fear of whenever you ask a rhetorical question is that someone may actually respond. So if you go and you ask a question, just be prepared for a response. Is there another way to frame that and make that happen? When I'm going and I'm speaking, I'm thinking about my voice and how that can go and how that can affect things. So I really want to consider volume. Because just by moving away the microphone right now, some of those of you that had fallen asleep quickly woke up because the quality of voice that you heard was different. Last night within the speech, the point where I said it, I'm not this, I'm not this, I'm not this, I moved the microphone away. So it sounds quieter. If the room was small enough, I wouldn't have used the microphone whatsoever. I knew with 3,200 people and the way that room was set up, if I didn't use the microphone, there'd be some people who couldn't hear me. But I'm going to move it away so it seems smaller and it affects the quality of the voice. If I speak too loudly, it's not effective either. So finding that volume and how you can go and how you make that work. the rate in which I speak, how quickly I speak. I spoke last night for comedic effect during the substitute story, but then during the scooping of ice cream, it was slow. I want you to marinate on that thought, so I'm going to slow it down. How much I enunciate? I'm a horrible, horrible mumbler. We'll talk about some of that stuff in just a moment, but I'm a horrible mumbler, and I need to work more on enunciation. Pausing, whether or not we pause to make something resonate. Or if you just speak quickly, so you pause and you make something resonate. It changes the power and the gravitas of something. And then finally, how we stress things. I did this earlier with I am glad you were here today. I'm just going to read this twice to show you how I change what this means just by where I place my stress. I'm glad you are here today. And the second time, I'm glad you are here today. Change the meaning of it just by the way I stress the word. Your ability to stress words and how you're going and how you're doing that can be huge. Within climbing, you boulder a lot, and so practicing is really, really huge. I think it's awesome to go and to do this. So some things that you can go and make this happen for yourself. Right now, what I'd like everyone to do, if you have a pen, and if you're coming to a workshop without a pen, I'm just really tripped out because I don't know how you're going to jot down any ideas that you came up with. But if you have a pen, I want you to stick it in your mouth right now.
My phone won't fit, I'm sorry. How do you hold this for 30 minutes?
It was hard.
Yeah.
Congratulations, you now have bird flu. No. With your pen, very, very, this is a thing you do within theater, the idea of saying the ABCs right now and enunciating. So you have to leave the pen in your mouth and then you go, A,